Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to folks all around the world who are joining us here today for our latest LinkedIn Live event from MIT Sloan Executive Education. I'm Peter Hurst, Senior Associate Dean of Executive Education at the MIT Sloan School, and it is just a delight and a privilege to be joined today by my colleague Hal Gregersen, a Senior Lecturer at the MIT Sloan School, for what I know is going to be not only fascinating, but a personally impactful for everybody who gets to participate in it conversation with Hal. So if you've seen us before on these LinkedIn Lives, you know that these are intended to be interactive. And we really hope that you'll post any questions or comments that you have that you'd like to share with us and with each other in the LinkedIn live stream as we're having this conversation. We will put your questions and comments to Hal as this event goes on. I know he's looking forward to hearing very much from you what your thoughts and ideas are about the ideas that Hal is going to talk about. Well, Hal, I mentioned, is a senior lecturer in leadership and innovation at the MIT Sloan School of Management. Former executive director of the MIT Leadership Center, a fellow of InnoSight, and a co-founder of the Innovators DNA Consulting Group. He's had an extensive career as a researcher in numerous world-leading institutions, but for the last, I think, 15 to 20 years, he's been here at MIT. He's been ranked as one of the 20 most influential management thinkers by Thinkers 50, winner of the 2017 Distinguished Achievement Award for Leadership. He is frequently sought out by companies and institutions to really hear about his profound research on leadership and innovation. And we are thrilled that he makes his home with us here at the MIT Sloan School and spends a lot of time with us in executive education, delivering programs for public programs and for companies, where he talks about what he's found in his research, and has truly impacted not only hundreds, not only thousands, but I would suggest tens of thousands of leaders around the world to really rethink their approach to leadership and innovation, and have tremendous impact from so doing. So I'm thrilled that Hal is here with us. Welcome, Hal. And I think the format that we'll go for today, because you have such a wonderful depth of insight and ideas that you always share, I'd love just to hand the stage over to you and let you talk to us about your work around challenge-driven leadership. And I'll come back in a little while and help facilitate some conversation with the folks that are watching, who I know will have a lot of questions for you. Does that work?
It does. And Peter, before you disappear, I do, first of all, thank you for joining us and for this chance to be together with me on this event, as well as thanks to everyone that's participating. But before we go off, those pictures, the photographs you see behind Peter, are of eclipses. And I just find it a fascinating metaphor for the times we're living in, where it's not this notion of a lunar eclipse, but it's this notion of we are moving in a phase sort of transition way from a place that we are pretty much comfortable with in our history into something that is largely unknown for most of us. And so we've all heard that idea that change is changing. I've heard it a million times over the last few decades, to the point that most people roll their eyes when you say that. But I'm honestly, genuinely of the belief that change has changed. And where we're going is where we've never been before. And, Star Trek, here we go. We're going into that space. So thank you, Peter.
Well, before we get going, Hal, let me tell you, so these photographs were taken by my cousin, and talk about sort of what you're talking about, uncertainty and how we respond to it. He thought he was going to Texas to take these pictures at the last total eclipse, and at the last minute discovered that the weather there wasn't going to work. And so he went in the opposite direction and went to northern Canada, in order to get these pictures. So it's a nice illustration.
Okay, so Peter, I'm not going to let you go again, because that then leads me to another thing that we have in common, which is both Peter and his wife and I have been, and my wife Susie, we were good friends with David Brashears, who unfortunately and sadly passed away earlier this year. But David is a mountaineer, cinematographer, director, climate change advocate, and I had the chance to do some work at Everest Base Camp and above in the Khumbu Icefall with him before he passed away about a decade ago. And one of the things that David does on any of these dangerous expeditions is he plans and he plans and he plans, like your cousin did, I bet, where there's like plans and backup resources and backup plans. And given that kind of exquisite preparation, even then, David would look you in the eye and say, Hal, plans don't think. And that's where we do need to plan, we do need to prepare, but there's a deeper level of agility that's required in this upcoming world and current world we're living in than, again, I think we've ever faced before. And that's what we'd like to explore here. So let's do a bit of an exploration of that, unless you have a thought, Peter, that might.
No, I think that's a perfect segue into what is challenge-driven leadership.
Cool. Well, it's really been an amazing journey to be at MIT for the last decade plus. And as soon as I came here, I realized this place is unique. And I've taught at too many universities, London Business School, INSEAD, Dartmouth Tuck School, and so on, where they're great schools, but they're not MIT. This place is a hotbed of innovation. We do it here. And one of our graduates is Lisa Su, Dr. Lisa Su, who got her undergraduate, master's, and PhD here. Early on in her career, somebody told her, Lisa, run towards problems. Now, if you took the time after the session to take a peek at the College of Engineering at MIT faculty page, it's hilarious. That's what they have as a headliner on their page. We run toward problems. And in a world full of challenges and problems, that kind of leadership is the kind that will provide solutions to these vexing issues that we're wrestling with. It's a powerful way of thinking about the world. And what I discovered with Deborah Ancona when I came to MIT at the MIT Leadership Center is Dr. Lisa Su is not alone. And we studied leaders coming out of MIT when we came to realize that, whoa, they don't really like the word leadership, but they love the word challenge, which is sign me up for a big, wicked, bold challenge that I can't solve alone. And because it's that big that I need other people, I'm gonna hire or attract you and you and you and you and you because you're challenge driven also. You're not coming there for me. You're coming because you love the challenge. And then we alternately lean in, lean out, step in, step back kind of thing when our expertise is needed. Doesn't matter who we are, what we look like. That's irrelevant because the challenge is key. And then we are hopelessly analytical, working the problem. Where's the data? Trying and experimenting, prototyping, and nonstop framing and reframing questions to move forward. That is what we call this challenge-driven leadership notion here. And that is what caused Dr. Lisa Su, when she had a very successful career at Texas Instruments, IBM, Freescale Semiconductor, in the world of semiconductors that she loves and is deeply committed to. And that kind of deep work, it's even deeper than the organization, because when she was offered the chance to become a senior executive at AMD, it was almost dead. And this was in the 2012, 2013 kind of range. But she saw the challenge, not only as an organization that needed to be revived, but she thought beyond the organization to, this is an organization within an industry, within a geography where it can't fail. And I believe working with people there, we could make a difference. And this share price you can see over the course of the last decade, she and others have made that kind of deep difference. So the starting point, oddly enough, for navigating the unpredictability, the unexpectedness, the uncertainty of the present and the future is actually being super thoughtful and reflective on what challenges matter most to me, to my team, to my organization, to the industry, to the world. And in that nested sort of logic, do I have clarity on that challenge enough that when I show up at work, people know that's what I care about. And when short-term demands come at us, and they always come at us, I will meet those short-term demands, but I won't run, and I won't run from them generally. But they've got to help me us make progress on a challenge we care about. So I'm not sure about thoughts or reflections on this challenge-driven piece, but Peter, any thoughts or questions that you might want to raise for just a moment about being a challenge-driven leader?
One that occurs to me is maybe you could give us, one or two sort of other examples of what are the kinds of challenges. I know at MIT we have a sort of an obsession with, as you described it, sort of big, hairy, audacious challenges. But in the people that you interact with in your executive education teaching, for example, what are some of the kind of challenges that real sort of managers and leaders and executives are grappling with that you find would be compelling in this way?
Well, at a broader, more public level, someone like Lena Nair, who had been the chief human resources officer at Unilever for a long period of time, her whole career was there after having grown up in India in a small village. Her challenge as a young girl in India was actually being able to go to college and get her engineering degree. And then when she became an intern at Unilever, it's like there were imagine that decades ago, a woman engineer in India and all the challenges ranging from hotel safety to fill in the blank she was facing. And she always took on those small challenges that over the course of her career, not only to make it better for her, but she always had this sense that if I do it now and fix this real issue, it's going to create a path for people behind me that will make it much better for them, women and beyond. And so, she's famous now. She just became the CEO of Chanel recently. And talk about the leap of faith going from Unilever to Chanel, from a publicly held to a privately held, from consumer products to fashion industry. It's a huge, massive shift for her individually. And then at the same time, she's working like everyone on this event today. All of us are wrestling with the issues of, given our organization and where we're at, these changes we're in the middle of, I honestly believe this, Peter, are going to change every organization's business model in the next decade, including ours at MIT. That's the kind of world we're walking into. And so getting clarity about that challenge really matters. And even though she's more famous now, there was a point at which she wasn't. And you go back in her career to those early stage kinds of things, whether it's a production manufacturing issue or a marketing issue or a human resource issue, she was always that kind of person that did not shy away from challenge, but gravitated towards it.
Great, thank you. I'm just looking at, we've had a couple of questions, but I think they probably will move you on to something I know that you wanted to
Let's
talk
do.
about. Paul was asking about the importance of an agile mindset as you think about challenge-driven leadership, but perhaps you could put that in the context of the kind of change that you were just started talking about there.
Well, and we'll go back to the slides now as part of a response to that, Peter. But the notion of agility for me at its most fundamental level is that I am trying to accomplish some kind of longer term intent. And as I do that, like we talked about a few minutes ago with David Brashears, plans don't think. The world changes. And I love this quote by George Box, who was a statistician. The only way to know how a complex system will behave after you change it, is to change it and see how it behaves. That's why agility matters. And so for me, it's underneath all of that, an even deeper starting point, which is this notion of agency and choice, that we are choosing to take on challenges. They are not given to you. Peter, in a technical sense, is my supervisor, my manager here at MIT. And, it's one thing for Peter to walk up to me and say, Hal, here's the challenge I want you to take on. It's another thing for me to go to Peter and say, Peter, this is the challenge that I think is most important for my part of the organization to contribute to the bigger part of what we're trying to accomplish. This is the one I choose to take on. And when we choose challenges, instead of take them on from somebody else, having them given to us, agility is a natural outcome because we've chosen it. Now, some of those challenges have the ones that matter today are in a different space. And this is where you'll notice lightly there in the bottom left, bottom right corner, Ed Catmull's name. And I happened to meet Ed Catmull about a decade ago because I admired who he was and what he had done at Pixar over the years, and especially his commitment to creating organizations that are sustainably innovative. And what I discovered working with Ed during the last 5 years is Ed's way of thinking more broadly about challenges and being problem solving and problem driven is that he's not alone. And so for the last 5 years, we've been exploring who are, in a deeper, richer, more immense kind of challenge way, these challenge driven leaders, and what is the underlying nature of the challenges they're taking on and choosing to take on. And so from that, there are three key areas that I'd like to suggest you think about as you consider the challenges that matter to you. And we're going to talk about them like 5 minutes each. We're going to spend whole sessions on them in the upcoming course, Embracing the Unexpected, that Ed and I are teaching next month. But here's the first one. What kinds of technologies and activities are changing in a way that those changes today are compounding into a change into the future? Something big will come from small effects. And so some of you probably know, I wouldn't have known it early on until I started working with Ed, frankly. This is the first monolithic integrated circuit in 1959. We're going way back here. Now, 6 years later, Gordon Moore wrote this belief that the number of transistors sitting on that chip is going to double roughly every 24 months. It was a belief based on data. He'd looked at what had happened 6 years before. He thought about the implications for the future. And he not only made this belief statement, but I would strongly recommend all of you sometime in the next 3 or 4 days, go online, look up Gordon Moore, look up this quote. You'll find the article. It's about a 4-page article. He had this sense of past. This is what's going on. Given that compounding change, here's what I believe will happen. If that occurs, this is what the implication might be. Mobile phones, personal computers, the list goes on, 20 years before they happened. And then he then also made a series of statements around these are the biggest challenges we face in order to make this belief come true. People forget all of that. They pay attention to the fact that, in fact, Moore's law did double, basically, from 0 way back in 59 to 140 billion today, which is about 37 doublings. And the chip sitting on my computer reflects that reality. Now, when we think of this kind of curve and Moore's law, we often don't remember that belief became reality by hundreds of thousands of people working together to make it so. And as they did to create computers like the Apple M2 Ultra chip, they created something in the last 50 years that is unprecedented in the history of the world. 40 to 50% compound annual growth rate on computing performance per unit cost. That's what that big doubling implies. I don't know about you, but most companies would be thrilled to have 10%, 15% annual growth. That'd be exceptional. But over 50 years, then the issue becomes, what are the implications of that for me and my organization? Now, 2 huge implications are coming up. Number one, when that kind of change has happened over the last 40, 50 years, everyone in this space of technology believes, with relative data-driven confidence, it will probably continue for the next 50 years. And if that's the case, if I'm a CEO, a senior leader, a middle manager, a first-time supervisor, a technical contributor at any level in an organization, I should be thinking through what are the implications for this compounding to happen over the next 10, 20, 30 years. And that means whenever I talk about long and short-term intent, as soon as I raise those words, eyes roll in the room like, I have heard that so much, Hal, I am blanking out and not listening for a second more. That's the end of it, Bo. And when that happens, it's a reflection of reality, which is most managers are given long-term objectives because they're taking on challenges somebody else also gave to them. And they're driven by short-term results in reality because there's not a whole lot of choice and agency in the system. Call it a low engagement organization. But when we take on big challenges, we choose long-term visions, goals, and intents. We choose them. They're not given to us. We know that to get from A to B, it's going to take time. And we're going to take full advantage of those compounding technologies to get there. And we know they will take time to get there. And so, love or hate Amazon, they've done a lot of amazing things. Yes, they have challenges, but they've looked back over the past 30 years at the challenges they've taken on that have created the greatest value. And here's the conclusion. If everything you do needs to work on a 3-year horizon, you're competing against a lot of people. But if you're willing to invest on a 7-year horizon, you're now competing against a fraction of those people. Few companies or people are willing to do that. Lengthen your time horizon, and you can engage in endeavors, take on challenges, make bigger impacts that you never could otherwise. And so the spirit of this comment here is, this is not just a Jeff Bezos thing. I'm not a strategy researcher, but I know enough about that world to know that companies who actually live what we just talked about take on longer term horizons while they deliver short-term results. They're the ones who deliver the highest value to investors. It's wildly counterintuitive, but it's real. I'm going to pause here for a moment. And Peter, you've had a chance while I've been blah, blah, blahing with my mouth to have a sense of what are comments, thoughts, any questions you think would be worth raising, Peter?
Sure. I think this is a perfect moment to pause, because while you were talking, even before you introduced this topic, in fact, people had started discussing the challenges of time horizons and what is sort of short-term versus long-term, and perhaps how that could be different in different realms as well. But one comment that I'm just looking for it now, I think Kashant and Valentina were having a conversation about if that's the dynamics of the system,
Yep.
what about the dynamics of the human beings and how humans are challenged by what you're describing? We've sometimes talked in the past about the fact that yes, the silicon is doubling every 18 months, but the carbon in our head is pretty static. And so, what's your comment on that?
Well, at a very broad level, the carbon impact and the climate change we are in the midst of, which I believe we are, there are real impacts of that. And all of that is compounding and combining technologies and activities, including human, that are creating something that accumulated over time. The more micro individual level notion of compounding in this long-term perspective is classic retirement account investment. And these are people who work in the finance and research in the finance world. I'm not a finance faculty at MIT, but there are people who look at this and they spent their careers on it. And here's the deal. They call it an exponential thinking bias, which means even if we're trained in math and science, when we're asked if we invest $400 a month, every month for the next 30 years, and we get, let's say, 10% interest, which would be wildly great, what's the net effect in 30 years? And the result of that is actually close to $3 million. Roughly 70% of the people would respond around $300,000. It's a multiple of it's a magnitude of difference that's significant. And that's why so many people are not prepared for the future, even at an individual level. And so around there in my other part of this room, in a closet, is a box from when I was a little kid, Peter. And my father was a construction worker. Thank heavens he did not have exponential thinking bias. He knew even in that industry, there would be ebbs and flows. And so he had a religious commitment to 10% of their income going into a savings account every month. And they did not make much money. But he knew that, construction jobs are going to come and they're going to go, and we got to have it. And there's a future ahead. And when he passed away in his mid 70s, that future was what helped my mother have a future. Now that's unique. My little bank account statement shows how quickly, after a few months, I put the money in at 10%, but then I pulled it all out as fast as I could when something shiny was in front of me that I really wanted. It was the short-term thinking. And so this is a human challenge. And so no matter what our industry, no matter what our level, which there are some differences, Peter, in horizons, I get that. Given a rapidly changing world where things are compounding and combining in unpredictable ways, all of us would be wise, from my perspective, to consider doubling our horizon. If we're taking on 2-year projects and challenges right now, how could I make that a 4-year project that would have a bigger impact? If it's 3, try 6. If it's 4, try 8. When I first met Ed Catmull, he's like, what was the last decade-long project you were engaged with, Hal? And I realized I'd never really done one like that. Does that help?
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting comments that relate to this that are going on. Maybe we can get to them as we can keep the conversation going. But I do think that some of the discussion that I'm seeing in the chat here is kind of struggling with that sort of paradox or the dilemma that if there's so much compounding change happening, what are the risks of sort of acting now versus waiting until we can benefit from those changes?
Well, this is where there are two things, two thoughts that are connected around that. One is, one of the programs we teach at MIT, I do it with Phil Budden, called The Innovator's DNA, where it's based on the work that I did with Clayton Christensen and Jeff Dyer. But here's the story. Do you collect your data at a secondary level? PowerPoint systems, Excel spreadsheets, the system data coming in, or do you collect primary data? Do you, whether you're, again, a manager or an independent contributor, do you have regular practices that get you really, really close to your end user, your client, your customer, your student, whoever it is, where you're in that place, in that space, and you understand intimately where they're coming from and what challenges they're wrestling with? And Peter, to me, that's the biggest insurance policy towards making stupid choices about the future, is when leaders, especially senior leaders, stop doing what I just said and rely on secondary data. It is like super easy to make really poor strategic choices. And we know from that data that emergent strategies are the smartest way to go, which is essentially an agile strategy. You're close enough to what's going on that you pivot as needed to get to that long-term intent that you honestly believe, gut level, is going to make a difference for your client. Maybe it's a patient in a hospital, whatever. It's just like, I can't not do it. But getting there is going to be full of surprises.
That's great. And Sonia and Flaviano and others in the chat are discussing, but I guess asking questions about. Let's say we agree with this vision that you're expounding. How do we bring other people along with us on that journey?
I've got a book sitting over there on the shelf that I wrote with a colleague, Stuart Black, 15 or 20 years ago, called It starts with one, changing individuals changes organizations. And I honestly believe that. Yes, structure, culture, systems, those kinds of things, reward and reinforcements, all that stuff matters. But at the end of the day, I honestly believe deep change across an entire organization starts with me. I make the decision that given what I know and care about for this part of my organization and given our clients and customers, this is the biggest possible challenge I can take on here and now. And I'm going to do it because I can't not do it. When I engage in those kinds of challenges with that kind of choice and volition, I will almost inevitably make an impact, and it's going to be positive. And that aggregates up into something where this is happening. And in today's world, it's like, what are the genuine real needs in this rapidly changing world? Do I honestly grasp the technologies that are compounding and combining out there that might have created the challenge or that I might leverage to solve it faster and better? That sort of leads us to this next piece. If we could go back to the slides, which is, it's a reminder, first of all, that Steve Jobs said, if you look really closely, most overnight successes took a long time. And this is so true about so many things. And let me give you an example. And because they take time, it means that there's this big challenge we're working on, but there are going to be hundreds, if not thousands, of intermediate problems in order to get there. And we're going to hit walls and we're going to fail. And in Amy Edmondson's notion of intelligent failure, we know that. We are doing it smartly. We know that we will have to fail to get to that endpoint. And so back to Ed, it took 23 years from him cracking the code mathematically to create the first 3D image on these screens that we take for granted today, and to create Toy Story with a host of other people at Pixar. In between, he had to do things like create the animation work for the second Star Wars movie in the 1980s, because that's where he got paid. And that's George Lucas was his boss. And he had to do those short-term things, all the while thinking, I'm trying to make progress towards a 90-minute full-length animated film by a computer. Doing this for George Lucas right now is helping us get there because it's still too expensive to buy all those computers to make that movie. So we're going to have to just bide our time, make progress, work on these challenges, and get there at some point. And so for him, creativity is problem solving. It's the notion of I'm problem solving, we're problem solving. It's not just individual, it's collective. And Inside Out 2 is one of those, it took a long time to get to that kind of success. And that long time is actually linked to one of many other companies, one of which is in the news now. But it started in 1993 and it was almost failed in 96. And you know the story, you know the history, you know the impact, you know all the glowing sort of things you read about in the papers. But what's really fascinating is Jensen Huang at NVIDIA knows that what goes up must come down. Early on, Intel started putting GPU chips on CPU chips and about bankrupted them. And that's when he realized, oops, I always thought things went up. What goes up must come down. He's always crafting that future. What's next? What are the implications? What's next? Now, he and others way back were intimately involved with Pixar because they were both caring about how do you make computer graphics faster. He cared about it because it was gamers he cared about it. And Catmull and team at Pixar cared about it because they were trying to get to that movie that would thrill people like Toy Story. And they were doing that for 10 years. Then, same time Lisa Su joined AMD, this is where ImageNet 2012, this event where globally teams, private, public, teams were putting together groups of people with their own computers, with their own deep learning and machine learning algorithms to figure out fastest and most accurately, is that a cat or a dog on the screen? That's the year that a team up in Canada had an almost 20% error rate, which was like success in terms of this error rate, where they were better than all the rest, called AlexNet. What did Jensen Huang do? He got with his team on the plane. He already was aware of this stuff going on, but he went up there, met with the team, started thinking about deeply, even deeper thinking about, this is a decade ago, how will this GPU-based computing power combined with machine learning and deep learning algorithms, combined with growing data sets with sensors and so on that are also rapidly compounding and expanding, how's that going to impact industries in the next 5 to 15 years? I honestly believe Lisa Su is asking some of the same questions at AMD. She had a CPU business and couldn't pivot as fast, but started to. Jensen realized then, we have to pivot. He believed in that long-term intent future. The investors hated him for it for years. Gamers initially were very angry about it, but they realized everything Jensen was doing to prepare for that future of being a full stack company from hardware all the way up to the right next to the end user apps to do that kind of work, preparing for that 5 to 15 year future. The gamers realize it's helping us. Games are cooler. They're better. We're having a lot more enjoyment out of it. Investors finally realized, oh, this actually has some traction, but it took years. What I'm trying to say here is, Jensen, I had the chance to be with Ed and him at the headquarters a few months ago. And here's his logic. It's just like, who else cares about this problem? We can't do it alone. Other people are also doing some of the same things. Some researchers at the University of Utah were looking at creating digital twins of buildings to get 30% efficiency use of energy in buildings. Jensen heard about it, went to them, invested in them, collaborated with them. They're solving very similar sorts of problems. You know about their investment in part in sort of equipment and so on with OpenAI. Care about it. Who else cares about the same problem? And at this event I was at, where I made this photograph of Jensen honoring Ed Catmull's contributions over the decades to computer graphics, sitting there next to Elliot Fishman, who before 2012 was already working as a radiologist with NVIDIA and Jensen around how can your work in gaming help us in radiology do our work better. Even in this event, he was asking each of them, what are the implications of generative AI for animation, for radiology? What does the future hold? He's already thinking at that level, and you care about the same problem. Let's work on it together. So this is not natural for many of us. We tend to want to just find and solve things ourselves, especially within organizations. And the invitation here, if you want to create the ways of change instead of ride them and live with them or be crushed by them, it's like, don't do it alone. Solo problem solving rarely works. It's collective. And so the reason we've got to do this is, here's some other data coming into the system. We've got 40 to 50% annual compound growth rate. If that continues for 10 more years, these devices, like the phone sitting here, it padded my side, so I'm not dumb with it. They'll be 100 times faster, arguably 100 times better. What does that even mean? And then you look at the aggregate computing speed. It's increased by 1 million times in the past years, and it's likely to increase 1 million times more in the next 10 years. What does that mean? How do we even get our heads around that? And these are not intended to be scare us numbers. They're likely to become reality. So the way I ground this is something simple, like what if ChatGPT or Claude or whatever system you use, Microsoft Copilot, what if those things were 100 times better? Forget the 1 million times. Imagine one of your coworkers showing up tomorrow 100 times better than they are today. I don't even know how to get my head around that, but I know that it's going to be something really different from today. And a lot of compounding over time is going to get us there. So just think for a moment. All these things are happening simultaneously. Algorithm improvement, robotics, more and more. Sensors, robotics take advantage of sensor technology. Sensor technology leverages photography. Lets robotics do their work. Apps and cloud apps help all of the above. All of that's coming to play in biotech and bioengineering, the metaverse probably still to come, generative AI, quantum computing, fill in the blank. These are not individual streams of combining and compounding technologies. You know it, it's everything amplified by magnitudes. Just recently, you may have read the same article where Ford's CEO went to China, took some test drives and rode in actual Chinese electric vehicles, and he walked away from that with, we're in the midst of an existential crisis here, folks. He was serious about it. If we don't change at Ford, we're dead. And I don't want to be, overstating the case, but I really believe we're all in the midst of some form of change like that, whether we see it or not. So, pause time. Peter, questions, thoughts?
Well, I think there's a lot of comments that people are really enjoying, kind of the juxtaposition that you have here, kind of creativity and sort of and technology, and the importance of those things coexisting.
Yeah. Can I actually build on that, Peter?
Yeah, please.
Because I think it's going to this next space. I'm not a mathematician by training, but as I understand it, mathematically, when things are either growing or declining exponentially and compounding and combining, the consequences are unpredictable. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. We know some things are going to happen. And the consequences can be positive and negative. And so that's why it's so important to have that agile, on the ground, what's really going on sort of sense. When we make a longer term commitment, even from a finance perspective, there's more risk involved with that. And that means uncertainty. And when we deal with collective problem solving, where we're intentionally checking on challenges to get to that longer term intent, we've got a lot of unexpected things coming at us. And so in a world that is rapidly changing in this way that we just described, what Ed and I realized is that the leaders who are really good in this space are exceptional at identifying and creating and building and sustaining and sometimes actually shutting down truth-seeking mechanisms to get to the reality of what is really going on right now. What's the truth of the situation? I'm not talking truth in a religious sense. It's just truth of the reality of what's going on here. Now, it's tragic that Clay passed away, a few years ago. Close friend, family friend, and colleague. He knew how powerful questions were as truth-seeking mechanisms. That was just the way in which he navigated through the world. And Clay initially was actually working with me on my Questions Are the Answer book because we both cared about the same thing, the power of inquiry to drive our work in solving these real challenges. It's no different for Jensen. We were just talking about him. He recently said in an article that basically he could go through the whole day asking nothing but questions. He is deeply challenge driven. How can we make computers do things they never can do? That's where he's at right now, to create that kind of future. He has 100 direct reports, no regularly scheduled meetings. The only meetings he goes to are the ones where he's invited and it's a challenge worth working on and he can contribute. That's power. That's powerful. And when he's sitting in those meetings, he's usually asking questions to give some sort of provocation to a better solution. So that's what I'm trying to invite us to do. Demis Hassabis, Google DeepMind, he also gets it, not at the individual level, but the broader system level. And so the invitation here is, are your questions strong? Are they powerful? Are they getting to the reality when things are changing so fast? Are your questions helping you understand those compounding technologies, create and shape and hold on to long-term intents? Are your questions driving better problem solving at a collective level? Or do you need to increase the question capability you've got? And if you do that, this is one of those truth-seeking mechanisms that Ed and I will explore. There are many, but one of them is questioning. Just real quickly, let's just take a whirlwind tour of that questioning piece. Way back, I was a photographer where I learned compose and wait logic. And earlier this week, I was in Palo Alto. where I made it real. I was doing some work with an organization there, Jazz Pharmaceutical, and wandered through the Stanford campus, noticed this, depending on yo or oi, sort of sculpture over there. And then I'm like, I want to actually go over and get my head inside that O and wait for something interesting to happen looking the other way. Compose and wait. The bicyclist comes up and then makes the turn. And you've got some fascinating moments where the reflection's up in the O. It's not like the world's most greatest photograph, but it's the logic here. I compose conditions and wait for something interesting to happen. And this is where our invitation to you, and the invitation this program we're teaching in, is these conditions of being wrong and uncomfortable and surprised and quiet and still were important pre-2024. But with the compounding complications of the technology in the world we're living in, they're more important than ever before. So for what it's worth, like, take a moment, step back, think carefully. How often am I dead wrong about things? How often do I say I don't know? How often do I get asked uncomfortable questions? How quiet and still am I? And how long do I pause when people ask me questions? And if I'm not doing that stuff on a systematic, regular, daily basis, I am going to get blindsided. That's the nature of this situation. I recently did some work with the chief technology officer at EY. It's like, this is a world where technology and AI is causing us to ask bigger, different questions. And what we discovered was that, yep, it does. When we start engaging with these tools, we ask more questions, more variety of questions. We ask more novel questions. And guess what, folks? We're also more wrong, we're more uncomfortable, and we're more reflectively quiet. And AI holds the potential of actually getting us into a place where we're surprised and unexpected. We're collecting new data. We're figuring out, let's reshape the long-term intent. Let's explore more of that technology. Let's find even more partners to collaborate with outside of our organization to solve these issues as we move forward into that future. So this is a really powerful question. If we have strong truth-seeking mechanisms, one of which is like inquiry and questioning, we're getting surprised and unexpected data coming in all the time. If we have weak truth-seeking mechanisms, it's the opposite. I'm going to pause for a second. Anything, Peter, from that for you or for those who are out there?
Yes, if I may interject a question of my own. This is always a fascinating conversation with you, Hal. Yeah, going back to some questions people were asking in the chat earlier. I think people feel very challenged by, when I buy into this way of thinking and trying to act and be in this way as a leader or as a manager in an organization. If I'm asking the kinds of questions that you're suggesting, and if I'm asking them of my team, what's your advice on how do I avoid what my team will try to go and do is just sort of in the near terms, take those questions as being kind of as being commands, and take them as instructions, as opposed to building this culture of curiosity and sort of humble inquiry that you're describing.
Yeah. And I'm glad you said that, Peter, because Ed Schein, who was a phenomenal faculty member for decades here at MIT, wrote a beautiful book called Humble Inquiry. And underneath that, we've got to remember that Ed's starting point was around socialization and organizational culture. And it's the notion that cultures get created because people solve problems habitually over time, and that pattern of solving problems became the culture. That's what's created the cultures we're living in today, that created some of the problems, Peter, you're talking about right now, and that embedded in that question. And that's why he wrote the book, I think, Humble Inquiry, which is, if we want to change our culture, we have to be of this spirit of humbly inquiring about what's going on here. Now, I'm going to go back to the starting point in response, Peter, which is when people ask me, how do I ask better questions beyond composing and waiting? The starting point, even before that, is what challenge do I care deeply enough about that I'm honestly going to do something about, even if the system hurts me? Because I've been so connected to my people on my team and I know their challenges, and that takes work and commitment. I've been so committed to the clients, end users, patients, customers, whatever we call them, and I understand their challenges. And so when I start asking these counterintuitive, often uncomfortable, but crucial questions of people in my team or the system, I frame them in the broader challenge. This is what this question's about. It's not just my challenge, it's your challenge. It's our challenge. And the reason we're doing that is for them, because that's their challenge. But as soon as we let go of that challenge-driven logic to approaching the world in the kind of rapidly changing world we're in the middle of, then the questions can become actually counterproductive and often clever and self-serving, which is what we don't want to do.
Great. I think that's very insightful, and actually maybe leads into perhaps you could talk a little bit more about, when you teach this material, in a company or in an executive education class, how do you practically help people to implement the ideas that you're describing here?
So it's inviting people, if they chose to if they were showing up next October, in a few weeks to our course, it would be a much deeper exploration, for example, of challenge-driven leadership, and then an application: are you and is your organization? It would be a deeper exploration of compounding and combining change, and then which of these technologies have influenced your organization and do you think will, and what are the implications, and how is that shaping your long-term intent? Deeper dive into long-term intent versus short-term, and managing and prioritizing those tensions. Then it's a step back to concrete tools and applications of how do we actually do that in real term. Ditto for collective problem solving, ditto for these truth-seeking mechanisms. And I'm just going to give you a real quick example that the spirit of what I'm going to describe here for truth-seeking mechanisms is what we're trying to do for all of those other categories of data, which are, or not data, but ideas, which is, here's the idea, but let's make it real, concrete. So in the case of questioning, there is a process where you may have been on a seminar or been in a program with me before, where basically you can do this alone. You could do it after we're finished with the webinar today. Set a timer for 4 minutes. You've got a challenge. I invite you to, as fast as you can, try to get 20 plus questions in 4 minutes. Write them down, number them. Don't take the time to answer. Don't explain in your head why you're doing it. And if you do that, at the end of it, here's what happens if you follow those rules. Boom. You will move from being frustrated about your problem to more positive. 80% of the time, your emotion jumps up. You'll reframe the challenge 80% of the time. You'll have new ideas to move it forward 85% of the time. And interestingly, if you do it with other people who care about the same challenge as you do, you'll actually have higher levels of psychological safety, which is what Amy and I are writing an article about based on some data we've collected, that exposing ourselves to others with real challenges, doing it to and with each other, setting aside time to ask nothing but questions, actually invites us to not only make progress on the short-term challenge toward that long-term intent, but it builds psychological safety, strengthens it, so we will take on bigger challenges tomorrow to make even better progress. Now, for what it's worth, it's really interesting, real quickly. When we take on big projects, immense challenges, we have bigger issues. I had one of these personally a few months ago around a huge project that had some real stuck elements to it. So I literally sat down for 90 minutes and I disciplined my head to follow those rules to generate 100 plus questions. I call it a marathon. Then at the end of it, I took a deep breath, got some tea, came back to the space, took those questions because it's 2024, not 2020, and asked ChatGPT, What are the key themes that you see in all these questions? Well, it was fear of inadequacy, resistance to change, and relational dynamics, unrealistic expectations, and so on. And I'm like, read through those, and that's pretty accurate. Okay, ouch on some of those things. Hal Gregersen, the person who loves change, is actually resisting change. Then I recently in London did a project with Azim Azar with a company called FM Global, where we're teaching this sort of stuff. And Azim talked about using personas to explore with ChatGPT your challenge. So I said, okay, what if Carol Dweck, the author of Growth Mindset, were looking at these questions? What questions would she ask me about my challenge? What about Mary Parker Follett, who's one of the most phenomenal century ago consultants, thinkers on planet Earth? What would she ask? I'm always curious about Steve Jobs' perspective. Then I went to Jensen Huang. What are the 5 questions he would ask? What about Bob Langer here at MIT, who's one of the most celebrated scientists on planet Earth? What questions might he ask? What about Katie Carico, who's in the same space and have had the chance to interact with her on some emails? She's amazing at this stuff. She asked me some really good questions. And that then caused me to think, well, what about Mary Curie? Historical figure. How would she approach this? And all of those things caused me to think differently about what I'm in the middle of and to reframe it and move forward. So the final point for me here is an invitation that you're on a quest if you choose to approach the work you're doing the way we're suggesting. It's a journey. It's going to take time. It will require a longer term investment on your part. It will require, like I had to do the last 5 years, I'm not kidding, a very deep dive into the science and technology of the world we're living in to understand it better. I am dead serious. For me, it was like a master's degree. Then it's like, okay, big challenges, taking advantage of these rapidly changing technologies. It's going to take time. Man, I need some other people. Who else cares about this? And when you put those things together, you're all on a quest. Now, here's what's really cool. I love this quote from Elie Wiesel. In the word question, there's a beautiful word quest. I love that word, but I love the next part. And some of you have heard me share this, but it's worth sharing. It's worth repeating. And I invite you to do the same, both at work and at home, because this is really an important conclusion for me. We're all partners in a quest. We are. You're my question, I'm yours, and then there's dialogue. The moment we have answers, there's no dialogue. Questions unite people, answers divide them. At every level, with every challenge, I honestly believe that's true. And so use your questions as a leverage point to literally up your game, expand your vision, capture a bigger challenge that you believe is going to impact an individual in a really positive way. I mentioned Jazz Pharmaceutical, and this is not a paid pitch for them. It was a paid thing going to do some stuff with them, so I'm not trying to pitch it in that way. But I was really impressed when I sat down with the CEO and the team there. When I walked into the room on Tuesday morning this week, there were 2 books that I'd never seen before sitting on the spaces for each person in the room. They were not your classic books. They were like biography and autobiography, and they were interesting books. I thought, what are they doing there? And what I learned was they were books written about the journeys by the people on these quests who had, in one form or another, cancer came into their life. And it's how they wrestled with it, and it's how they made it through. And there was some small role this pharmaceutical company made in that process. And I think what they were trying to do with their senior team is to remind them it's not about us. Leadership has never been about me. There are 2 questions we ask, I hope ask, whenever we got into this leadership work. Do I love getting things done through other people? Do I love it when they succeed as they do it? That's the kind of inquiry-driven, ask-driven, take on big challenge kind of leadership we're talking about. And that's the invitation here. And I and we all wish you, honestly, the very best as you negotiate an endless series of challenges. I honestly believe some of these tools and frameworks and ways of thinking about the world can help us navigate them a little more effectively. So quest well.
Thank you so much, Hal. And I feel like even in this hour, which I think for all of us has really flown by, we have all felt the compounding of the ideas that you've shared with us over just an hour. So imagine, if you will, on top of an hour with Hal, spending a whole 2 days with Hal with this kind of compounding. That would be the experience of the course that you were mentioning in October that's coming up in a few weeks' time at MIT. And Hal runs a few different courses for us in executive education and Sloan. So there are multiple opportunities a year to come and spend some time with Hal, thinking through these ideas, practicing them, applying them, and experiencing for yourself the compounding effect of actually embracing and taking that risk. Many people in the chat were talking about, how do we create the space, the psychological safety for ourselves and for our teams and for our organizations to grapple with these great challenges and to really make a difference. And if I may be so bold, I'd suggest that spending more time with Hal is certainly one way that we could all take important steps on that journey. So Hal, thank you for spending this hour with us. And if you'd like to share any final thoughts about the upcoming course, now would be a good time.
I have one last thing, which is, and I forgive me if this is going to feel like a course pitch from me, but I've really been blessed to work with super interesting people in these courses. And so all of the courses I teach at MIT, Marcia Dunn, who's a very thoughtful master graphic illustrator, she's a part of that experience and causes me to rethink what I'm doing. And so then there's this notion of the courses for me are logical. It's like inquiry-driven leadership. Am I asking the right question? Then Innovators DNA, how do I ask that question? And Phil Budden is just another powerful contributor that complements, and he causes me to rethink how I think about innovation. And then, we also, in the questions or the answer course, have got Jeff Wetzler, who co-founded Teach for America years ago. He's also recently written a book about asking. And so Jeff and I are going to be bouncing off each other in just a couple of weeks in questions or the answer, because we're there to learn something new about questions. And then it's the same thing with the Innovators DNA. Then the navigating transitions, everything we've talked about, Peter, has deep implications for me and you. What skills am I going to let go of and take on? What roles am I going to let go of and take on? What part of me and my identity am I going to let go of and take on? That's what that course is about. It's a very deep dive into, given what we just spent 60 minutes on, it has profound implications on every one of those things in terms of how we navigate change. And that's where this, in some ways, is like a capstone course, this embracing the unexpected, where all of that combines in a very unique way. And it's just a privilege to, again, work with Marcia and with Ed Kaplan on that course. It's me, yes, but there's usually a collective of other people where we're bouncing off of each other in order to build something different the next time we run it.
That is great. And I can confirm that all the excitement that Hal just shared about what that experience of being in the room with all of those folks is as energizing and as impactful as it sounds when Hal describes it. So
Thanks, Peter.
Hopefully some of the people that have joined us over the last hour will have the opportunity to experience that personally as well. But for now, Hal, I see we're just a little bit over time. So thank you for being so generous with spending this hour with us, sharing your ideas and leaving us all with some practical things that we can do literally when we get off this call, or as soon as we can find just 4 minutes to get started. So thank you. Thank you all for joining us, and keep the conversation going, please.
Thank you.